Yeah, you know what they say sometimes? You better hang on to your hats. It's getting kind of windy. And ain't that the truth? We are actually getting down to the brass tacks in the legislative session for 2015. The bills that have survived the crossover, and there's some that are getting mooshed around and hearings and stuff. But all of that also is on top of that. We find out a whole lot of new stuff coming out. So we're trying to discuss the new with the old. And remember, during this session of the program, when we're talking a little bit of political stuff, there's no email questions. If you want a question, you must call in to the Mike Buck Show at AOL.com. No, wait a minute. That's the email. You must call in on the phone line. There you go. 296-KHNR. That's 296-5467. And like me, you get to say good morning and hello to Rep. Beth Fukumoto, who is in the house. Good morning.
Good morning.
Wow. I mean, I would have thought that after a crossover, everybody can sit back and cruise for a little bit and take a look at their bills and think what they're going to think. Boy, you guys got stuff coming at you from all angles.
No, there's no time to think. Yeah.
Interesting stuff. First of all, just on and this is certainly not a partisan issue at all. We seem to accept these days, Beth, horrendous amounts of money that we need to spend to fix stuff. And one thing that comes to mind, two things that come to mind right now, and I don't think that these were on the agenda before they came up. Well, first of all, is the reflecting pool around the big square building is jammed up.
Always.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I guess we've all known about it for a while. And here's where something comes to bite you. We know about historical preservation and all of this. Apparently, we can't just fill it in. We have to keep it losing money like that. What's going on with that thing?
Well, so when I actually first started the legislature a few years ago, there were some measures to potentially replace it with like a taro patch or something else.
Or a putting green, anything.
And really nothing has ever passed. It's always controversial, and then they just continue to fix it. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but basically unless the legislature passes a law to fix it, we can't fix it.
Well, the thing that, look, it has to be fixed. We all know that. Something's going to happen. But the number that we seem to accept, it's just like, what do you mean 10 million? What are you talking about? That's 10 million of our taxpayer dollars. How could anything cost that much?
Right. And so that's why we've talked about cheaper options, but there's always pushback. Anytime you try to, if you try to just fill in with taro or something else, then the public sort of says, well, why are you focusing on something so stupid? But then if you have spent $10 million to fix it, then that is a lot of money to be spending. So it's really a no-win situation.
I happen to laugh because, Keoki Kerr gets cutting-edge stuff. He gets to go out and do all this investigative reporting, does a great job. But even I had to smile because I've been there exactly where he was standing to do his upper. It smells.
Yes.
And he's standing there. Oh, boy.
It's terrible.
Yeah. And wouldn't you think that we could fix that up? Anyway, I know it's just an example. Now, there's another example. And I can understand how we sort of start forgetting stuff. But we all became aware of this building downtown that's apparently been vacant for 12 years. All kinds of reasons why it should have been vacant.
Right.
But 12 years later, it's going to cost more than it cost to build the building to fix the building.
Yes. And this is the Kamamalu building.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah. And the cost of, we all know the cost of construction is high.
Sure, it is, and going higher.
And going higher. Sometimes it is higher for the state because of the different procurement hoops we have to go through. But the cost of construction is going up. And in the case of this building in particular, I think the question is whether or not we're going to be able to utilize that space to make more money in the end. And I think that's what we have to look at.
Right. And I can understand that. And I do know that in reality that's probably true. Just as converting to solar and everything else, it costs a lot of money, but it does have a light at the end of the tunnel, right?
Right.
Here's the concern that I already have had from a couple of people. If these folks go back into that building, the building and space that they've been renting from 12 years in the private sector is going to be vacant.
Correct.
And we're already not overfilling our office buildings. We got a lot of vacancies.
Right.
And we got all of these climbing cranes. Isn't there a point in which we're going to be building more offices than we can sustain and not enough houses?
Yeah, I think a lot of the building right now is residential. There is some commercial going in, but there's places where we need more commercial. I think at some point out in Kapolei and Eva, we're going to need more commercial space if we want people to move out there. So I think there is room to still build commercial space, but when it comes to especially the state leases, so this is another one of those situations where it's very difficult. Yes, the private sector will lose some revenue. However, the state will be reducing its costs.
Yeah.
And that's what people really want. So ideally, we can reduce taxes.
We almost want
right?
to really underline, highlight, and bold that because that doesn't happen a lot.
Right.
But here's something interesting. Let's go out to your neck of the woods.
Okay.
I got an interesting email. This is not a political statement, so I can use part of it because I actually got it before you got here. It says, wonder when the unions will step forward and prevent their people from moving back into these buildings. Moving will have to be negotiated. Furthermore, where will all of these tenants park their cars? Because that was a problem with that building before. I remember when the state wanted to move the departments out to Kapolei. Did anybody go? That's a great example. We're talking about the rail. We're talking about, a real second city opportunity. Isn't that also the case with making sure that we move a little bit more pieces of our government out there when we can?
That's where I am concerned. I would rather see us moving whole departments out to Kapolei rather than building more in downtown Honolulu. Because if we're going to make let's say moving more out to Eva Beach, because we don't know that the rail is going to go all the way to Kapolei. But ideally, we would be able to move some of government out there because that's what's really going to make the difference, right? Businesses, other people don't want to move out to Kapolei because they have to drive all the way into town if they have to do business. So we really need to move out.
I know of that in Seattle when I was there. There's quite often in the buildings that I was in where you would go down and get on the train and go across town to the other building, go to a meeting, get on the train, come back because it was that frequent. Our train is going to be that frequent. So a lot of those people, they may have to in the morning drive to Kapolei, and they may have to come into town maybe twice a day, but they could do it quickly.
Right. Yeah.
Boy, knock on wood, how long is that going to take that? Okay, and we're not going to solve that problem immediately, but we are going to talk about this. Another thing I saw on the front page of the paper this morning where a new measure is coming up in the House to take a look at an audit of the performance of the contractors and of HART in the rail. Is this because the state is nervous that if things fall apart, we're going to have to be the deep pocket, or the state's going to have to be the deep pocket?
Well, we've already been talking about an audit, and what initially it came out of the Senate. The first Senate committee that looked at the rail increase said that it was going to have to be tied to an audit, and that it would also have to be tied to increased state development of state lands for affordable housing. I thought that was a great measure. The House and the Senate ultimately opted not to include an audit in the final bill just to keep the bill somewhat clean. So I think the right way to go about it is to do it through resolution, and it's a good idea. I think people really want to know where the money's going.
Okay, I am kind of worried as we take a look at this thing, and we seem to, like I said earlier, we seem to just blindly accept these big, huge figures, whether it be $10 million to fix the pond, $12 million to fix the building, another $1 billion for the rail. I mean, I think that we're losing the reality of it. Isn't it somebody's job to say, hey, let's come out with some public disclosure. Let's come out with a point where we can maybe see where the money is being spent on these projects. Nobody seems to be offering that to us. Wouldn't that be something HART could do? Their reputation sure would be better if we knew, if we could see what they were doing.
Yeah, so what's difficult with HARTs, so because they're a public-private partnership, essentially, or they're a semi-private entity, not everything they do is supposed to go online. So things having to do with subcontractors and contractors, those are private organizations that don't want to put the details of what they're spending online for other competition and other things. So we can't tell those private companies they have to put stuff online. In terms of HART actually, the problem HART is really having is that they put all the documentation online. All of this has been available online for the past 5 years, really. But the thing is, it's coming out in 1,000-page documents that are written by engineers, right? Yeah. And what they really need is... It's
like when Pelosi said, just sign Obamacare, we'll read it later. It's too confusing to look at it.
Right. So when I asked them things like, hey, did you guys always know that we were going to have an operating cost, that this wasn't going to be self-sustaining? They say, yes, we put it in the initial document that we put out to the federal government. It's in there saying $80 million, but because people don't read that stuff, it's not user-friendly. Okay. And I think what really is the problem is that elected officials on the city side are responsible to translate that. It's not necessarily a department's responsibility to translate that to the public.
Boy, I would sure like, we call the government, top down, and it's supposed to be bottoms up, right? It's supposed to be you go to a neighborhood board meeting, somehow that message gets up to your office, and everybody's happy.
Right.
It seems like that maybe is the way you go backwards and disseminate stuff and say, hey, look, just in case you didn't know, here's what's been going on. Here's where we've been spending your money.
Right. And Hart, so out in Mililani, I think I've listened to maybe about 5 neighborhood board presentations from Hart. I feel like they're always there presenting. But again, I think the point at which we're having trouble is that elected officials generally know. I know how to tell my community stuff better than, say, the Department of Transportation.
Oh, absolutely. That's
Right?
a good point. Every single that's what you call grassroots.
Right.
You're in the store and somebody comes up and says, "Oh, you're Beth, huh? Oh, and you can give somebody an
Right.
answer which goes like a pebble in the pond, right? It circulates through the whole community in no time.
Right.
Yeah.
And what has happened is that our city elected officials, our council people, not all of them, but a lot of them have not done that.
Yeah, it's too bad.
So it's the information is not trickling down in a usable format for the public.
More coming up. Beth Fukumoto Chang is in the house. If you want to chat with us, it's easy. 296-KHNR. We got plenty more to talk about as the legislature heats up to make final decisions on the 2015 session. Here's
Mike Buck on AM 690. The Answer.
Okay, trickle up or trickle down. We're trying to figure that out. It's actually, and I say this often about the Western Pacific Regional Fishery Management Council, that is it's a semi-quasi-government council, but it actually pays attention to what comes in, and that's why we got to talk about this a little bit. Beth Fukumoto Chang is in the house, and we're talking about how sometimes it is way more effective for somebody at the local level to disseminate information about issues than it is to read it about in the press and see it on Hawaii News Now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and it really works. I'm impressed, at least in my neighborhood. For instance, let me just back up for just a minute because this can a microcosm of what can happen. We had this last weekend, the second of 2 weekends of a carnival. There were a lot of people really opposed to this thing, and it was the great lawn and all of this stuff, and it was a well-run event. Everybody that was interviewed that was there said, well, it was fun. It was expensive, but it was fun. Everything's expensive. But doesn't that just show you that if you have a neighborhood that sort of agrees with something, the right things will happen. And maybe people ought to think about going to these meetings a little more than maybe once every quarter of 5 years or something.
Yeah.
Your own experience. Let people know, Beth, how you got involved in the process in the first place. What started?
What started was I answered a ad in the UH newspaper asking for, it was $13 an hour, a researcher job. So I was like, hey, that's great for, when I was
big money.
Oh,
back
absolutely.
Then, sure.
Yeah. So I was like, all right, I'll give it a try. And I think this must have been 2000. And I answered an ad for minority research. So I went in not realizing what it was. And about halfway through the interview, I realized, they mean minorities and Republicans. And
those evil people.
Right. And to which at the end of it, they said, that was the previous director that put in the ad. We don't have $13 an hour. We thought you were coming in to volunteer. And I was just like, I'm not coming to volunteer. So they called me back and they said, well, we found $8 an hour. We can give you that. So I came in. I did like once a week or something as an intern. Yeah. And that's how I started. Yeah.
I think that the value of these programs, and I've seen this at the Western Pacific Regional Fishery Management Council a lot. I know right now at Moanalua School, there's a summer program for people that want to get involved in the ocean. Most of us, and in our building, in our businesses, a lot of people in the radio and TV business started out as interns just because they had aspirations and they found out what it was really like. Yep. And then some of them actually stayed in it.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, I know that a lot of people want to say, okay, what's happening? Let's talk about this a little bit, stray off the path for a minute. You're going to go over to Maui. There's the Republican Party is starting to reach out and get organized for 2016. There are challenges there. What do you expect is going to happen? What do you expect to see, and more importantly, what are you going to do when you're there?
Okay, well, this weekend is the Republican conventions across the state. So all the county conventions. The Honolulu convention is at Moanalua Middle School, I believe. But I'm going to be flying to Maui to speak there. I'm just going to mainly be speaking about the different, legislation going through stuff we talk about every morning. But I think sometimes on the neighbor islands, people don't get enough information from the party just because we don't have any elected officials out there, and they often feel neglected and ignored. So I'm excited to be able to go out.
I can tell you one thing. We've learned from the volcanic activity of late. We've learned from the storm activity about little communities. Yeah. And I think that bringing that attention to these communities has helped them too. They realize, wow, everybody knows about us now, and they're all trying to help.
Right.
But nonetheless, we've had the first mainstream Republican come out and announce that he's going to be interested in running for president in Senator Cruz. I would anticipate that what we have to do is a lot of soul searching ideologically as to who we want to be our next leaders, and this goes for both parties, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the Democrats, we saw that most recently with the Carlton Ching nomination. The Democrats are dealing with their own soul searching and their own ideological battles, but we on the Republican side certainly have some very intense ideological battles going.
You know, when you mentioned the DLNR thing and Carlton Ching, I think that no matter what happens, and it's certainly no reflection on Mr. Ching, because he has been a very successful and accomplisher, but it does show you that if you are opposed to something, if you and you don't even have to get organized, you just have to say your piece, somebody listens.
Yeah, and I'll say, the credit to Governor Ige in this whole situation is that he did withdraw the nomination at the end, instead of twisting arms. If this was Governor Abercrombie, he would have been standing in that balcony staring down at people. So I think it was nice that Governor Ige let the Senate decide, and he let the process work the way it works.
Well, I think that what happened, my observation that I said on the radio was that I was thinking that Governor Ige was being a bit presumptuous, saying that I don't care what the committee says, I'm going to take this to the full vote and this guy's going to get in.
Right.
Then I think he just plain counted votes.
Yeah.
I think he just counted up.
Yeah.
But it does show. I mean, today I think the announcement's going to come out that there's been a decision made about the new athletic director of the University of Hawaii. It does show that if you're for something or against something, if you really do get up, I'm trying to get people used to the fact that you respond to your constituents, and they should get in touch with their leaders, right?
Right, absolutely. And I think, and I think there are probably a lot of people out there after the same-sex marriage conversation that would say that's not true. It doesn't work. They're going to pass the bill anyway. And I hear that all the time. We're dealing with comprehensive sex ed. And I hear a lot of organizations starting to organize and starting to plan rallies. And the truth is, I think there's still a chance to stop that bill, but in a lot of people's minds, there's no chance. So we just have to be as loud as we possibly can and make it as painful to pass as possible.
Is it sometimes that people they're so loudly screaming against something, they don't know what they're for? I sort of think that a lot of times that some of the energy that is being expended on something that might be kind of, quote, a lost cause, unquote, that you might have just say, all right, look, if the folks have spoken and this is what's going to happen, all right, let's accept that fact, but here's how we can handle it.
Yeah, and you miss your opportunity sometimes to actually make positive change, or to actually make strategic decisions. Yeah. And that's what's so frustrating for me is I think sometimes the most strategic thing is not, and I said this to somebody the other day, if you only have 7 people out of 51, which is the case in the House, are you going to is it wise to throw all 7 people into the same fight all the time with everything they have? It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that's a very
good
point.
What you do.
Right now, there is a tremendous amount of confusion in the Republican Party, or those that are considered conservatives, as to who's on first and who's what.
Right.
There's been a picture painted by a group called HIRA that all of you people that are in elected positions, almost all the 7 that you mentioned, are really Democrats. Isn't that sort of unsettling?
It used to be unsettling, but it's almost to the point of being somewhat unreasonable. I think, it's now been all of us that have been labeled as fake Republicans. And at some point you have to ask yourself, okay, well, does that mean that real Republicans can't get elected, period, in the state of Hawaii? You know what? And that's really my question for HIRA members is what has this organization done to get anybody elected?
Yeah, my point is this. I mean, right now there's this statewide reaching out by the Republicans by saying, let's get organized. But I think that there's a lot of people that are confused as to, all right, well, organizing means contributing, and contributing means donating. And are we donating to a bunch of people that are Democrats? I mean, isn't there a mixed message going on here?
There's absolutely a mixed message, and I think Hira is taking advantage, and there are other people actually taking advantage too of there's a couple blogs out there that I feel like are using people who have maybe a minimal understanding of how the system works, and sometimes that's the most dangerous, when you educate people a little bit and then you sort of twist the rest of it so that and that's what's happening. It's propaganda.
Beth, haven't we found out that just yelling no against something without having a plan B is what is going on in the past a lot?
Oh, absolutely. It's not a different strategy.
Yeah. And so what actual fact is, you say, we realize that most of you want this, but please consider our view, and this is our view. Right. And this is a solution that we seem to have. The time that we've been able to spend together with you and some of the other members of the House this year in both sides, I think there's a new wave of young people coming in that are a little bit more thorough in what they do and not necessarily listening to whoever passed them the baton.
Right. And I think it's the young people, the millennial generation is a very pragmatic generation. It's the first generation that's going to grow up probably less wealthy than their parents.
Yeah, kind of scary. Huh?
Yeah, less wealthy, less educated, like, right? Less better off. Yeah. And that's a reversal of the American dream, and that's something to be concerned about. But the way that I feel like my generation is approaching that is very pragmatically, because we have to be pragmatic. We don't have the luxury of being ideological all the time.
More coming up with me and Beth Fukumoto Chang, the minority leader of the House of Representatives here in the state of Hawaii, Ledge in its 2015 session right now, but it's also news time.
This is Mike Buck on AM 690, The Answer.
All righty. Getting into that part of the legislative session where the bills that don't really mean much are getting a little nervous. They might be out with the bathwater. But the good news is it is clearly identifiable what's going on. And the good news, even better news, is there's been a better way to track stuff. I want to compliment not just Governor Ige, because he gets to be the beneficiary of this, but I think that if there is a legacy of significance from Governor Abercrombie, that him picking up on the follow-through on the technology department at the state, it is much easier, don't you think, to look into a bill and to find your representative and to send you an email and do all of those things that it ever was before? Yeah,
it's actually the legislature a couple years ago won an award.
I was going to say, didn't we get an award a couple years ago?
Yeah, for its website, and I think it is much better. It's easy to find stuff that is released online. What I would like to see is more released online.
Right.
So I think
that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, all right, the vehicle is there, but the content is sketchy sometimes. It still is sometimes difficult to find out what's really going on. That should be something easy to correct.
Yeah, and sometimes there are good reasons for it. Sometimes it just takes the committees a long time to get the bill draft done and that sort of thing. But it's hard. I know I've been getting a lot of phone calls to see if we could get a draft of House Bill 459, which is the comprehensive sex ed bill that was just amended in the Senate. And it's been difficult to get a draft because it's not done yet, but it's been days now. So people are frustrated.
There's another thing on that issue. When something gets passed, whether it's be Pono choices or whatever, the opt-in and opt-out, it gets kind of fuzzy. I think in many respects, one of the things that people need to know if they want to know more about that bill specifically is to have a better online presence of, okay, if you don't like it, here's what you can do. Or if you do like it, here's what you can do. You know what I mean? Give people I think a lot of parents just don't have the time to go look for stuff. It needs to be right in their face.
Right. And that's where, as the Minority Caucus, we've tried to do better. Sending out emails or send out information. Last week I sent out an email explaining my vote on that bill. Sending out another today about another bill. And I think we just need to get better at turning that out. And I know, like every other legislator, we get really busy and people really want information. And sometimes it just takes a long time to get it out. You know what? Somebody wanted me to ask you this, and this is not political, but they want you to explain is, what does voting yes with reservation? What does with reservations mean to you? You voted on that bill with reservations. What does that mean? So that bill, if you look at the vote on that, the whole caucus, including Cynthia Thielen, voted no. I was the only one that voted yes with reservations. at the end of session, we have something called a conference committee. That's coming up soon. It's when the House and the Senate meet to discuss the differences on the bill and what they want to keep, what they don't want to keep. I suspected that the Senate was going to change this bill to opt out again, and I want it to stay opt in. It's better for parents if it stays opt in. If the Senate changes it and then the House doesn't change it, then we have to meet in conference committee and discuss the changes, discuss whose version we're going to take.
In other words, that vote, when it was yes with reservations, didn't mean that that's how you're going to feel at the end of the thing.
Not the final vote
It's
at
right
all.
now you have reservations.
Right now I actually think this is a bad bill, and I would vote no, except that when we meet in conference committee, if you voted no on the bill at any point, you cannot sit on that conference committee. So the importance of that conference committee, as I explained, it's the Senate and the House coming together to discuss the differences. If the discussion is over opt-in versus opt-out, I would like a seat at that table.
Yeah, so now that being said, because there's so few Republicans in the House, do you sometimes have to talk as a caucus and say, hey, look, this might make me look bad, but I'm willing to do this.
Yeah.
But because if I don't get on the committee, maybe you will.
Which I told my whole caucus is I cannot sit, and we have the right to have a minority member, but if we've all voted no, then we cannot have somebody on that committee.
Wow.
So because Cynthia
That's
also
like
was voting no,
Yeah.
I had to go yes. So
Yeah, I don't know that if we all in the general mix really understand what goes into a vote and what the value of a vote is.
Right. And I've gotten a lot of I sent out an email immediately explaining it because I knew a lot of people would be upset, and most people wrote back and said, "Oh, I completely, that's great. I didn't understand that."
Gotcha.
Right. So
yeah, that's why I wanted you to have the opportunity to explain what that means, because we've all heard the expression, "It's not over till it's over."
Right.
I mean, and I would imagine, and you can give me some examples if you'd like. There's some other bills that are very much like that are limping through what they need to do, and when they get into that committee later, it's just they'll be killed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or fixed.
Yeah, the rail tax is a big one. The Senate's bill is very different than the House bill. That's definitely going to go into conference. There are one of the most interesting ones to me was Sam Sloan I think it was Sam Sloan's bill, had a bill for a tax holiday. It turned into a tax increase somewhere else along the lines.
Yeah,
and when
whoops.
Right.
Wait a minute,
and
that's not what I had in mind.
Together to have conference committee, it turned into a gambling bill. So the conference committee can actually take all the contents of the bill and add completely different things.
Yeah, see, I gave an example of that a long time ago. I think a couple of years ago when Gene Ward was with me every Monday, and he said, you know what? It's like it says a bill relating to tires.
Yep.
And then you really find out it's a bill about gambling if it's going to be on buses or not, because buses have tires.
Right.
It's very confusing.
It gets crazy. And conference committee, what is so important about that is that's the only point at which the public cannot testify.
Boy.
No member of the public will have any input on the bill at that point, and you really need to make sure you have somebody at the table.
Yeah, and it's that simple. What is the timeline now? I mean, we know that the session is past its halfway point. What's next?
So we are past our halfway point. We're considering Senate bills right now. So on Friday, we'll vote on second reading for a lot of these bills, and that'll be the point at which most of the bills are probably dead that we haven't heard yet. And then Finance Committee will start meeting for about a week, and then we'll vote on all the Senate bills at once. It'll be another one of these long days where we have 200 bills to vote on. Right after that, we'll go into conference committee. So we're looking at a couple of weeks before conference committee starts.
Is this the busiest time that lobbyists have?
You know, it's probably a busier time for lobbyists. For us, it's a little bit of a lull because at least the bill number has cut down. We started with, 2,000, and then what we got back from the Senate was only, a few hundred. So it's actually reduced significantly. The House is starting to hone its priorities, so we're not hearing everything under the sun anymore.
I was talking to a guy the other day who's a lobbyist, and he said that most lobbyists have way more bills that they're concerned about, but they're only their organization is zeroed in on one specific bill. But given the opportunity to speak with a Congress, with a rep or a senator, they'll say, "Oh, by the way, there's something else that I want to talk to you about too." Does that sometimes surprise you that they're so totally unrelated? And you think, how can this guy, being a lobbyist for this guy or this people, have a concern about this bill way over here that's got nothing to do with them?
Right. I think that. Well, yes. I think the most interesting one. Sometimes sometimes HSTA testifies on things that I just think, oh, really? I didn't know you guys cared about that.
Well, case in point, let's talk about this mandatory sick leave for a minute.
Okay.
Obviously the unions have got that all squared away. They've got these packages with sick pay and vacation, sometimes to the point where somebody doesn't even have to bring in a note. If they're entitled to sick day, they just get it whether they're sick or not. All of a sudden, Randy Pereira from the union is saying, hey, little restaurants, you're not union, you still got to provide paid vacation. Isn't this getting to be a little kind of assuming on behalf of the union?
Yeah, I think it's the public sector unions have a completely different deal than private sector employees. And that's where, maybe the pay is different. The pay is lower on the public sector side, but all the benefits really make up for it. Mm-hmm. And so I think whenever we're looking at whether we're talking about privatizing organizations or whether we're talking about putting more regulations on private companies, I think we need to be not expecting business to do more at the very least than government.
Yeah,
does,
and
right?
when we come back after a short little break, we got to talk about that because I've had a tremendous amount of pushback from businesses that say, hey, you know what? If this happens, and it happens that I'm in that category, I'm going to either be out of business or my customers are going to not be able to afford my service or goods.
Absolutely, yeah.
More coming up right after a look at traffic.
Mike Buck, all Honolulu, all the time. On AM 690, The Answer.
Okay, it's interesting as we see what makes things work. One of the things that we often talk with our senators and reps about is the ability to look down the road a little further than we do. I mean, I'm kind of worried about lunch today and maybe if I'm going to go fishing on the weekend or not. And when you're in the House of Representatives or in the Senate, Beth Fukumoto Chang, I think you got to say, okay, I wonder what I'm going to have for lunch in 2018. I mean, you guys have to sharpen your pencils and figure out how to look down the road a little bit.
Right. And that's, I wish we did more of it. I think what's hard in the House, especially because we're elected every 2 years.
Right. It's a lot quicker.
It's actually hard to plan out that far because you don't know if the priorities will change. I mean, a lot of people's priorities from 3 years ago are different now because it's a different governor. But even if you imagine every 2 years there being maybe a different health chair or a different transportation chair, the timing sometimes makes it difficult.
You make a good point because I don't think that most of the people understand the ramifications of a new governor. Because one of the things that happens with a change in administration, city is the same way. There are a tremendous amount of department heads and other people that rely on the incumbent or the governor for a livelihood. Oh, right. And they know the day that a new guy's in there, they're most likely out of a job.
Right. And so most of the department heads change. If a head of a department changes, the priorities can change. Not always, but they can. And particularly in this last case where we had an incumbent governor get unelected, it was the state saying we don't like your priorities, which means Governor Ige is wise to not just follow, the previous governor's priorities. Yeah.
However, I do know that what you're saying is, and maybe some people have to understand this, we have this mandate for a balanced budget in the state, right?
Yes.
And yet in the private sector, union contracts and the like are usually a lot longer. Because you do it the best you can. You negotiate the best you can. Right. But I need people to understand, and maybe you can explain it better than I have tried heaven knows many times, is that this legislature can't encumber the next legislature. In other words, a lot of these agreements are short, not because you want them short, but because they need to be.
Yeah, which is what makes it hard. So let's take the Hurricane Relief Fund, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Good one.
Everybody wants to try to put a provision in there to say that this will never be rated, right? We'll never take this money for anything else. But we can do that, but we really can't bind anybody, make anybody listen to it. Well, we've had examples of that. We've had these no-touch things before that have been touched anyway. Which is why, the Hurricane Relief Fund did get touched. So did the Rainy Day Fund. And it was because you can't do that. It's going to be a different legislature.
Different people, Beth, can redefine when it's raining or not.
No, exactly.
I don't know. It wasn't raining when we made this thing, but it's raining today.
Right. And it makes sense, right? At first I thought, why can't we? But really... the legislature makes the law. So if I make the law now, but am unelected next year, somebody else can remake the law, right? Yeah. So it actually it actually is common sense when you think of it like that.
It lends, however, a lot of people have a mistrust in elected officials because they say, you know what, they vote where their sponsorship comes from or where their contributions come from.
Right.
How fine of a line is that? I mean, it is pretty fine line. Don't you need to really spend time? Because from what I understand, a candidate can't say, gee, I didn't know that my fundraising guys got money from those guys. Now it's getting to be, you better kind of know that, huh?
Oh, yeah, you definitely need to know. I think you really should know. One of the things, if we take the rail conversation, I've had a couple of conversations. Most people have been somewhat understanding about where my district is at, and why I'd be voting in favor of the rail, essentially. But I've had a couple of people who have said, well, we gave you money, so
Right.
you should change your vote. And to which point I have to say, where do you live? Because not. I know it's not in my district.
That's an important thing, because I think that most of us make a compromise with somebody that we elect. We say,
Sure.
I like this person. I don't agree with what he or she says about
Right,
this,
right.
but I can live with that because
Right.
I know how he or she feels about this
Right,
or that.
right.
Let's get a specific example here. Right now, we have a big long look being taken at Waikiki.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the city and county of Honolulu is Waikiki.
Yeah.
However, the State Board of Land and Natural Resources and Army Corps of Engineers and everybody else is involved in the beach, and the beach is a mess.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're looking at saying, okay, well, maybe the TAT tax has got to pay for that.
Yeah.
Doesn't the state rely on that money?
The state does rely on that money, for other things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In other words, we take money from the tourists.
That's right.
And we go spend it somewhere else.
Yeah.
But in actual fact, we really are spending it on the people that are benefiting from their job in tourism, are we not?
Right, and I think, to me, the most important part of the TAT is the money that goes to the counties, that goes to building infrastructure. That's, for me, the key, is as long as we're taking that money, it needs to go into the infrastructure for both the tourists and for the local residents.
Okay, because when you take a look at a park, you want somebody that's driving around the island to be able to go to the bathroom
Right.
somewhere and take a photograph
Have it
without
be
getting mugged
safe
and to be,
and,
all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And yet, we take a look at some of these parks, and it seems to me, and this is always a big issue, and I know you're working at this, the state parks are sometimes neglected. The restroom facilities are embarrassing. Security is a problem. People park a rental car there and get it ripped off. I mean, we can't put up with much more of that.
Right, and it's difficult, right? So from just from a more conservative perspective, it's hard to say at what point will the state doing anything more really make any difference. Should we spend a ton of money for more enforcement? Is that really going to matter? Should we just keep fixing it? Is that going to matter? Because people just keep breaking it.
Well, when you take a look at the numbers that it's going to take to keep Aloha Stadium the way it is for the next 20 years, it's criminal.
Right.
I mean, so obviously we've come to a point where we just shrug our shoulders and say, well, I guess if we have to spend $20 million for that or $30 million for that, we'll just do it. So what about Waikiki? I mean, isn't Waikiki a state issue just as much as it is a city issue when you think about it?
Yes. Just because it's where so much of our money comes from.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so it looks like there is engineering expertise that can say, if we do this, we're going to keep the beach. And if we don't, and so if we pay for it, we'll do it the TAT. I'm worried about one thing. Who selects what the amount of the TAT is? Is it the state?
It's the state, yes.
Okay, so that means we can't keep going to that bucket, because after a while, a tourist is going to say, wait a minute, I got this report about homelessness
Right.
and about crime and about filthy bathrooms and about a huge tax. I'm going somewhere else.
Right. Yeah, the TAT, the state can increase it, and it's not. We like to think that it fixes everything because it's this big pot of money. It's sort of like the GET. It's one of those big taxes that we take in. But I think we use it for so many different things. But the priorities are just, we have to decide what's going to make sure that we keep getting this TAT in. If that means fixing the beach, then that's what we have to do and reprioritize.
If we say that, okay, we're going to fix the beach with that money, but we also as taxpayers, not as tourists, because it's a tourist thing, let them pay. They got plenty of money, let them pay. But we need to know that GET is being cocooned and protected. And I do know that there are some bills that we're going to rock at it. Are there any left?
No, only the rail.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that is, there will be either an extension or an increase, but there are some caveats. What do you think is the most likely scenario with that one? Is it the dropping down to 0.25%? Is it fixed number of years? What are some of the things going through the minds of the people that have to make that decision?
I don't think we're going to see a permanent extension. I don't think there are the votes in the House to do that, even if the committees wanted to do it. But I don't think that they do. The House has taken a much more conservative approach. The House is saying 0.25%, potentially for longer, but the Senate is saying 5 years at 0.5. I don't know if that's. I don't know that either of those gets the money that's actually needed for the rail.
When the state or the county puts out a bond, it has a maturity, right?
Yes.
And it has to be guaranteed
Yes.
to be able to be paid.
Yeah.
Isn't that what the mayor wanted? That extension so that there could be municipal city bonds used or more borrowing done on the rail project?
Right. So that's why they wanted 20 to 25 years. If we give them 20 to 25 years, they can borrow for longer. So it's essentially, the way I like to explain it to people is, if we say 5 years, we're basically saying, okay, you pay for the rail in cash, hard, or in short-term bonds like CDs, essentially, right? That's the way to look at it from a private sector, kitchen table perspective, rather than actually mortgaging out the rail, which is what the 25 years would give the city the ability to do. In a lot of places, mortgaging something out makes a lot more sense when it's an infrastructure project. People rarely pay off infrastructure projects with cash.
Yeah, and that's the only comfort in that is that down the line, whether we like it or not, there will be TOD or transit-oriented development.
Right.
That there's going to be people taking advantage of whoever's riding the train, isn't it? Yeah.
Right, and that's the hope. Of course, it could increase the debt, but
Wow, we're out of time, and it's
No
only
problem.
Wednesday, but we'll see you on Monday, right? And there's going to be a lot happening in the next
absolutely,
couple of
yes.
days. Thanks, Beth.